away number 7, and you're going to need a Bible for that. There should be enough Bibles on the tables for you. We're back in the book of Genesis, right? Genesis should be an easy book to find, right, since it's in the beginning. So, as we get started, open up to page 29 in your booklet, lesson 7. And what I want to do is it talks about the very top there, it talks about God's mercy. Can somebody give me kind of an off-the-cuff definition of mercy? What do you think mercy is? What does it mean to be merciful? What does it mean to show mercy? If you were to identify it in somebody's actions, their words, behavior, Shiloh, an idea?
Maybe like thankfulness.
Thankfulness. So if I show you mercy, that would be me appreciating you.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not far off. Yeah, that's pretty close. Other thoughts? You show mercy to someone. Any other thank you? Micah?
Grace.
Grace. Oh, there's a good word. Now, I will tell you there is a difference between grace and mercy. Let's see, 8th graders in here? Let's see, Ava, Cameron, Connor, okay? Right? So, you guys are not far from learning how to drive, okay? Probably scary for some of us, right? So, say for instance, you're driving your car, right? And you're going over the speed limit, okay? You go over the speed limit, you get pulled over by a police officer. And the police officer comes over, knocks on your window, and he asks for 2 things. He said, can I see your license and your proof of insurance? That's what they usually ask for when you get pulled over, right? And he sees that you've been, he says, you realize you were speeding. And so what he says, I'm going to let you off with, what do we call it? A warning, right? That's what we want. We don't want a ticket. We want a warning. Now, that is an example of mercy. Right? Because what do you deserve for speeding? A ticket, right? Consequence, punishment. What do you get instead? Nothing. You get off of the punishment. It's like somebody telling you, I'm going to let you go this time. That's mercy. Now, Micah brings up grace. And mercy and grace are what we talk about kind of side by side, but there's a difference. Using the same example of you going over the speed limit, getting pulled over by the police officer comes up and goes, hey, you realize you were speeding, and then he gives you $100. Right? And that's much different than letting you off, isn't it? Right? You were speeding, you deserve punishment, you deserve some consequences, and instead you get this incredible gift, $100. Okay? So when God gives us grace, what do we deserve? Punishment. Right? Because of our sin. We deserve punishment. We deserve to spend eternity apart from God. And yet, what does he offer us? Heaven. This incredible gift. So grace is getting what you don't deserve. Grace is getting what you don't deserve. You guys, we're not far from Christmas. If you kind of think of presents as being grace. I know most of us think at Christmas time that's a tradition to get gifts. But really, when you think about it, isn't a gift something that is undeserved? Right? You don't come down Christmas morning and kind of go, I should have 7. Let me count them. I should have 7 presents. Right? That's not gifts. That's kind of obligation. Right? So most of the time, if someone gives you a gift, it's undeserved. It might be expected, but it's undeserved. That's what makes it a gift. That's why grace from God is a gift. It's undeserved. We don't have it coming to us. Mercy is not giving you what you deserve. Okay? Grace, getting what you don't deserve. Mercy, not getting what you do deserve. Everybody clear on the difference? Okay? So, I want you to think of a time. You don't have to write it down. In the very top there's a big, long blank there. But I want you to think of a time that you received mercy. Now, none of you are driving yet, so you can't use that as an example. But I want you to think for a second. Think for a time, whether it happened in your family, whether it happened in school, whether it happened on a team. When did you receive mercy? Just to show me you know what it is. Can you think of some? Give me an example of when you experienced mercy, Shiloh.
I was kicking a soccer ball in the house and I broke something, and my dad said, okay, that's fine, but don't do it again.
That's mercy. Excellent example. Yeah, excellent. Good job. Other thoughts? lots of mercy that you have received or experienced? Micah?
Driving my grandpa's truck and I'm hopping hard and then rock.
Very good. Very good. Driving grandpa's truck, popped the tire, and didn't get the kind of trouble that you could have gotten into. Right? Mercy is not receiving what you do deserve. Right? It's showing mercy. It's showing a resistance to punishing. Okay? All right. So you guys got a handle on that. So we're going to talk this evening, as we continue to walk through Genesis. So everybody got a Bible open? Ladies, Bible open to Genesis? Right? Genesis chapter 12. Now, we are not going to read, we're going to cover really chapters 12 through 27. That's a lot of chapters. We're not going to read all of them. We're going to read little parts of them. But we're going to really kind of walk through the stories of what the characters are and what it teaches us. Remember what we call this? We call it a narrative. We don't call it a story because sometimes stories sound made up or make-believe. If I'm like, I'm going to tell you a story, it might be true and it might not. So we try not to relate to the Bible as a story so that some of the things that are pretty amazing aren't made up, aren't make-believe and fantasy. Instead we say it's a narrative, which means someone is relaying to you this information and the stuff that's happening. So let's see. Let's read in that little tan box. Would somebody read that first one, Shallow? The first paragraph, real big there.
God chooses Abraham from the line of Shem to carry on God's promises of a Savior. God calls Abraham out of his country to
Now hold up for a second, Shallow. That is Abram, not Abraham. Now, it's the same guy. And we're going to see where it comes up. But it's Abram now, and about halfway through the paragraph, God changes his name. All right, keep going.
God promises Abram that even though Abram and his wife Sarai are needing to follow God's command, but God stops him. Abraham finds a wife for Isaac from his family back in his homeland. Isaac marries Rebekah, and they have twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Though Esau is the firstborn, God chooses Jacob to continue the line of promised Messiah.
Very good. Well done. So, if you guys should have three names that kind of jump out at you, we should be familiar with these names if you have been in church for any length of time, and all of you have. And a lot of times God describes himself in the Bible. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Have you guys heard that phrase before that God has used? Sometimes it's in the Old Testament mostly. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So those three individuals are what we're going to focus on tonight. And why God uses them. He says, I am not, it's not that he's not. He doesn't use the phrase, I am the God of Adam. Or I am the God of Moses. Even though he is, but when he identifies with the Hebrews, right, his chosen people, he often lists those three names, right? And that's actually grandpa, dad, and son. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're all related. Grandpa, father, son. Okay, the three generations. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right? And so we're going to walk through that. Let's see. Connor, would you read those last two little tiny paragraphs for us?
The narratives in this section are found in the book of Genesis, chapters 12 through 27. These narratives took place roughly between 2166 and 1930 BC. The count of Jacob also took place around the time of the patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The book of Job is one of the books of wisdom and poetry, along with the books of Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Songs of Solomon. The book of Job was most likely written by Job.
Or a contemporary. Well done. Thank you. So what we're seeing that the book of Genesis here, written roughly, these narratives took place roughly about 2000 BC. Right now, that's 2,000 years before what event? If it's 2000 BC, what important event?
Jesus.
The right answer in confirmation most of the time is Jesus. Right? So 2,000 years before the arrival of Jesus. So 2 millennia, as we would say. All right, turn the page. All right? And so now we're going to start kind of piecing apart this and kind of see where it takes us here as we go through. And if you can see those two pages, in fact, let me ask you to do this. Open the two pages side by side instead of folding it under. Right? Put them side by side. And you guys see the little dotted line arrow that connects all those paragraphs? Everybody see it? What I'm talking about? It's kind of faint. That's what we're going to follow tonight. Right? That's kind of walking us through Genesis 12 all the way through 27. So I'll kind of touch on those maps and things as we go along. So one thing I want you to notice on this, not a lot of people catch this, but if you're in chapter 12, everybody there in your Bibles? Chapter 12, verse 1. Anna Jo, would you read that first verse?
Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you.
Okay, so here's the very beginning of the interaction between God and Abram. I want you to notice something about the word Lord in that verse. What do you notice? Anna Jo?
It's kind of italicized.
Well, it's kind of italicized. There's even something different about the letters. You're onto it. It's all caps. Now, let me explain to you why that is. Nowhere else in the Bible, right, New Testament, things like that, is the word Lord all in caps. Right? The word Lord is often capital L, little o, little r, little d. Okay? Whenever in the Old Testament we see the word Lord all in caps, what it means is that word is actually Yahweh. Have you guys heard of the word Yahweh? A couple of you, right? Yahweh, well, let me just ask those of you that have heard it. What is Yahweh? Do you guys know?
All I know is I talked about it at the Jubilee retreat last year.
Yeah. Do you remember anything special about it?
Isn't just another name for the Lord?
It is a name for the Lord. Now, it's not only just another name, it is a very special name. And the reason being is this is the name that God gave himself, right? It's when I was your age, my father was an important guy in his business, and so sometimes people from his business would call our house. And so when we'd answer the phone, we had to answer it as young people like you. We had to answer it very formally. We couldn't go, yo, because it might be somebody important for my dad. So we had to act really formal. It's like, good afternoon, Glenville residents. Who may I say is calling? Right? We had this way that we had to answer the phone. And that who is calling was really kind of key. Because if they're like, could I speak to your father, right? I'd have to say, hey, Dad, it's so-and-so. I'd want to know who it is on the phone. So when God spoke to his people, sometimes people would go, who is this? Right? I know it's God, but what do we call you? When we talk about you, what do we call you? And he says, Yahweh. Now, Yahweh is often spelled this way, Y-A-H-W-E-H. Yahweh. Right? Now, in Hebrew, there actually aren't any vowels, believe it or not stand alone by themselves. So they spell it Y-H-W-H. Right? Now, and they don't use English letters, they use Hebrew letters. All right? But anyhow, that's the name. So every time we see capital L-O-R-D, it's Yahweh. Now, Ava's exactly right. It was a special name for God. In fact, Jews to this day, right? Practicing Jews. By the way, practicing Jews don't believe in what part of the Bible?
New Testament.
The New Testament, right? They don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They believe he's still coming. So we actually agree, Christians and Jews, on all of the Old Testament. We agree on all of it. We agree on Genesis and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the stories and the miracles and God giving the Ten Commandments all right in line. And then as soon as Jesus shows up, wink, we go different directions. They're like, we're still waiting. We're still practicing the Old Testament ceremonies and the temple, and that's why they talk about when they go to church, they go to temple. Right? Because they're kind of still mimicking the Old Testament temple practices. They don't kill animals and sacrifice animals anymore. That's kind of unpopular in our culture. But that's where the differentiation happens, where it differs. Now, Yahweh, they believe is so special that they don't speak it out loud but one time a year during a special ceremony called the Day of Atonement. Otherwise, they will not speak the name Yahweh. Sometimes they will say Elohim, and that's a word for God, but it's a more general name for God. Like if I was trying to describe Connor to you guys, and I didn't want to use his name, I said, you know that guy, right, sat at the table nearest the kitchen? That guy, right? Now, it's not a very nice way to refer to you, but maybe somebody would still know who I'm referring to by just saying it's that guy. You know, it's that tall guy, right? It's that guy that was sitting on that side of it. It's that guy, but not use the word God, okay? Instead of using the name Yahweh, which they thought was so special because it was God, we shouldn't speak it out loud. So it was a reverence. It wasn't a fear or some kind of weird practice. It was just it's such a precious name that you shouldn't use it. You guys could probably imagine if you had an idol that you looked up to. I mean, in an okay way, not a sinful way, like a movie star, rock star, something like that. You probably wouldn't walk up to them and call them by their first name, right? Especially you guys, because you're much younger than them. You wouldn't go up to a baseball player and go, "Hey, Tim, how are you?" Or "Hey, Angie," or whatever. You'd probably kind of go Mr. or Mrs. or whatever. So it's kind of along those lines. We don't call God Yahweh, at least the Jews did, the Hebrews did. They would often say Elohim or the Most High or His Majesty kind of thing. All these respectful things without actually speaking His name out loud because it was so special. All right, so the call of Abram has here, and Joe just read that. God comes to Abram and He says, "Go from your country and where your people live, your family, and your father's house," which means everything that you have, "to a land that I'm going to show you." So I want you to understand, it's almost like if I came to your house tonight and said, "Pack up a bag of clothes and we're going on a trip." What would be your question? Where are we going? And God doesn't tell him. He says, "We're going to go to a land that I will show you in the future," right? But you don't know where you're going. So you're going to leave your house, your family, a lot of your stuff, and you're going to pack up and we're just going to go to a land I'm going to show you. So right away, remember we're going to talk about how Abram is faithful, but also how Abram fails, right? He's actually just like all of us. There's times that we're faithful and there's times that we fail pretty badly. All right, so let's see. Bodie, would you read that paragraph, those two little paragraphs under the call of Abram?
Sure.
So Abram's father, you see what I'm talking about? That first paragraph, bingo, right there.
Oh, Abram's father Terah took his family from Ur to Haran. God called Abram out of Haran and out of
Idolatry.
to become the father of a great nation. God's chosen people.
Keep going.
What did God promise Abram? God also told Abram that in him all families of the earth would be blessed. How would that happen?
Good. All right. Very good. So I want you guys to take a look at that map just below, right? That map in the center of the room, the page. And I want you to find right? Find on there and circle it. Everybody find it? Where is it? Which side of the map? Right side. I see some of you guys doing this, right? You're holding up your fingers, right, left. Okay. Right. It's on the far right-hand side. Follow the red line all the way up to Haran. Find it? Circle Haran. So that's where they travel. Okay? Abram gets a call from God, right? From Yahweh. And he says, "I want you to take your family. I want you to leave the rest of your extended family, your grandparents, your cousins, brothers and sisters. I want you to pack up your stuff, and I want you to head to Haran." Now, he didn't tell him Haran. He just says, "I'm going to show you a land, and we're going to go to Haran." Okay? So, now, open up to, you have Genesis 12 open. Let's see. Chloe, would you read 6 verses for me of chapter 12? Everybody else follow along.
Which one?
Of chapter 12 of Genesis. Read 5 verses. 1 through 5. Starts with, "Now the Lord said to Abram."
Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. possessions that they had gathered and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came out to the land of Canaan,
All right, stop right there. Michael, would you pick up there verse 6 all the way through now?
Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel, which is with Bethel on the west and Ai on the coast. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going forward to Negev.
Okay, now I want you to follow on that map. Follow that red line down from Haran, and I want you to find I. A-I. Right? And circle that for you. So you have 3 little circles on that map. So you understand they traveled way north, and then they came way south by I. Can everybody see next to I is a little place called Luz, L-U-Z? In parentheses, you see, what do you see in there? Bethel? Right? Bethlehem. It becomes Bethlehem at some point in time. This is all in the Old Testament. And then down a little south, you see Jebusi, and that becomes Jerusalem. So just so you understand, this is 2,000 years before Jesus comes. So I want you to kind of understand that they're in the neighborhood, right? This is just not some odd dot on a map, but this is right there in the Promised Land. So they're not far from the Dead Sea, from the River Jordan, from the Sea of Galilee, and so forth, okay? Those are those little blue areas just to the right of I. That's what you're seeing there, okay? So one of the things it says in verse 3, God says to Abram, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Who is going to come from Abram's family? What's the right answer in confirmation? Jesus, right? So Jesus is going to come from the line of Abram 2,000 years later. So I want you to understand what God is telling him. God doesn't make a habit of telling people in the Bible, I'm going to make you great. Everybody's going to worship you. Everybody who blesses you, I'll bless. Everybody who curses you, I curse. He doesn't do that to people. Right? So what he's actually saying, he says, everyone who blesses you, your name, your ancestors, I will bless. Right? So in what Bodie read here, it says, what did God promise Abram? Right? He promised him that he would have this land. Jot that down. He promised him that he would have this land. Jot that down under that first paragraph we just read. Right?
Is that the call of Abram?
Under the call of Abram, yes. Right? What did God promise Abram? He promised to give him that land. And it says then God also told Abram that in him all families on the earth would be blessed. How would that happen? What's the right answer? Jesus is how that will happen. Right? Think about it. If people trust in Jesus, is that a blessing? Yeah, eternally speaking it is. If they curse Jesus, is that a curse? Yeah, it's hell. Right? So yes, absolutely. So that's what he's really getting at here. So in the beginning here, even though the promise that God would send a Messiah started where? The first time the promise that God would fix what broke in creation. Where did that happen? Where did God make that first promise?
Garden of Eden.
Garden of Eden, right? He will bruise your heel and you will crush his head. He was telling Eve, you're going to have a descendant that is going to fix what you both broke. That's the first promise. And that promise continues. God's revisited here with Abram. He says, Abram, you're going to have offspring. By the way, how old is Abram here?
75.
Did you catch it? 75. He's 75 and he has no kids. Okay, 75 years old, right? And he has no children. I don't know if you know a lot about 75-year-olds, but they don't often have kids. Not at 75. I don't have a lot of grandparents that are 75 and having babies. Okay? And it's just, your body doesn't work that way. Even back then, which these people lived a little bit longer, but if you remember the timeline last week, remember we talked about Methuselah? How old was Methuselah? Do you remember?
960.
Yeah, it's just shy of 1,000 years old. But by the time we get down to the end of that timeline, most people were living about 150. Right? So it had gone down from almost 1,000 years. Adam and Eve were both 900 and 800 and so forth. And Methuselah was the oldest. By the time we get to Lamech and things like that, we're getting down to about 150 years. So it makes sense that here, Abram, he's not living 1,000 years. So 75 is old. Okay? And Sarai is only a year younger than him. So we'll find out about that in a second. All right, so they travel, they go down to Ai. God says, I'm going to show you this land. And it says that Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negev. And if you can kind of see that, you guys see that little region, great big capital letters on the map called Negev? You guys see it there? Go straight south from Ai, it's a bigger word. Okay? The Negev is a region. It's on the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. That's that little blue area on your map. And then just to the left of the Negev, you see Shur, and then you see a little green area. What is that? On the far left-hand side of the map. Yeah? It's Egypt, right? So you see the Nile River. Now the Nile is a river that, I know it feels funny that they kind of flow this way on the map, but understand that's still downhill. Even though we always kind of go downhill is like at the bottom of a picture. Just, you're up on looking at a basketball, and you drop water on a basketball, it can roll any number of ways because you're looking down at it. This is looking down. So they continue on. So next paragraph here. Landry, would you read that under Egypt?
Abram listened to God and journeyed with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot to the land of Canaan, the land promised to his descendants. He settled there between Bethel and Ai, but soon a famine made them go down to Egypt. There, Abram showed a lack of trust in God's care. What did Abram do? What was the result?
Okay, so Genesis 12, let's look at verses 10 through 20. Parker, would you read the first 5, please? 10 through 14 of chapter 12 of Genesis. So it says, now there was a famine.
Now there was a famine in the land. So Abraham went down to
Just Abram. You haven't changed his name yet.
Abraham went down to Egypt to
Sojourn.
There, for the famine was certain in the land.
Severe. Really bad.
When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarah, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me. But they will let you live. Say you are my sister. That it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that woman was very pretty.
Perfect. Well done. All right, so understand what's happening. There's a famine between, where they're living in Ai, and they go, we got to go down to Egypt. Remember the Nile River, all that green? That's a pretty lush area, right? They're living on the Sinai Peninsula, we call it, and that tends to be very dusty and sandy, and not a lot grows at times, and they have famines. But down in Egypt, very rarely, because the Nile River is so huge, it's a little bigger than the Mississippi, right? And so as it spreads out, all that water gets in there, and it grows things and so forth. And so they got to go down there to get food. But sojourn means to go look for work. Right? I got to find something to do to protect my family. And so as Abram goes and journeys in, he says, listen, we're Hebrews. We're going to look different than the Egyptians. Right? And he says, I know Sarai is my wife. You're really, really pretty. And when we go into Egypt, there's going to be people, they're going to see you, and they're going to see that you're pretty, and they're going to want you as their wife. Because in Egypt, they'd have many, many wives. So you just kind of picking wives. If you have enough money, you got lots of wives, right? And so he says, so I can be safe, lie and tell everybody you're my sister, because they won't kill their brother when you come into the land, but they would kill her husband so that she'd be available to get married. You guys follow me? Right? So that's the story that she's going in there. It says, lie to them and tell them you're my sister, not my wife. If we're married, they'll kill me and take you as their wife. But if I'm your brother, they'll actually flatter me and help take care of me, and it'll work out well. Right? Which is really dishonest. All right? Remember, Abram is faithful and he fails. He does both pretty well. Okay? The next 5 verses. Leah, would you read the next 5, 15 through 20?
And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to the Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into the Pharaoh's house. And for her sake he dealt with Abraham. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues of Sarah, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she was my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." And Pharaoh gave her then orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had.
Very good. Thank you, Leah. So, we've got this story where he lies to say, I'm going to try to protect my own skin, and I'm going to tell everybody that you're my sister, not my wife, right, so that I'll survive. Kind of selfish. Also doesn't trust God in that, right? Because God said, you're going to have offspring, they're going to inherit this land, you're going to be a great nation, and so forth. So he goes, well, I got to cover my own hide, so to speak, protect my own body, and so I'm going to lie about my wife. Pharaoh does get word that she's really pretty, takes her as his wife, takes her into his home, and then suddenly there's plagues that break out. Right? That's God saying, that's wrong. Okay? And somehow Pharaoh, doesn't tell us in the story, somehow Pharaoh figures it out that it has to do with him taking Sarai as his wife. So he now comes to Abram, her brother, and says, why did you lie to me? Right? My family, my house were suffering because you lied. Now get your stuff and get out of here. By the way, Leah was listing off all those things. Those were all the benefits of giving Pharaoh his sister. Right? Donkeys and camels and servants and things. It was like giving them gifts. Hey, your sister's great, Thanks for letting me, marry her and things like that. Here's all this gifts, right? All this stuff. And so off he goes. So the question becomes, what did Abram do? What was his sin? He lied. He lied. Jot that down. He lied. Now, if you want to be specific, he lied about Sarai being his sister and not his wife. He lied about Sarai being his sister. And what was the result of his lie? What happened? Plagues. I think that's good enough if you can remember that. Plagues happened. If you want to say plagues happened to Pharaoh, that's even better. Okay? All right. Now, next to the map, before we go over and follow the little dotted line, under that little speech bubble next to the map, it says God blessed Abram and Lot. Lot is his nephew, by the way. Just so do you guys know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? You guys remember that one? Cities that were destroyed by God, a lot of bad stuff going on. Abram and Lot were there, right? That's who God goes in to essentially rescue. If you remember the story of Lot's wife, this is Lot's a little older here, and Lot's wife that God commands, don't turn around and look at the destruction, and she does, and what happens?
She turns into salt.
She turns into a pillar of salt. Not really sure what that all was. An actual pillar, was it a statue of salt? Doesn't really matter, but she's gone. Ada?
We just recently read this.
Yeah.
And if Lot hadn't been dragging on and doing that, then he probably would have been up in the mountains, and his wife wouldn't have had the temptation of looking back.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, it shows as we go through this story, and I guess I'll keep revisiting this. God's people, even though God makes the promise to Abram that there's going to be a great nation from you, they make lots of mistakes, right? Lots of sins, lots of failures, right? But that's what God uses. God uses broken, failing people like us, right? Abram decided to part ways and let Lot choose the land he wanted, and in doing this, Abram showed trust in God's promise. He didn't guard his land jealously. And so when we think about that, so there are times where Abram demonstrates faith, and there are times he demonstrates very poor faith. All right, next page, God's covenant with Abram. God's covenant with Abram. Cameron, would you read that paragraph for me? Abram wondered how.
Abram wondered how God would make his family great when he had no children. Would his servant be his heir? No, God said. Abram will have a son who is 21 on. Then God pointed him to the stars and said, "So shall your offspring be." What was Abram's response?
All right, so Genesis 15. Go there, please. Genesis 15, 1 through 6. Now, remember, when Abram leaves his town, right, of Ur, he is 75 years old. It takes a while to travel. They've now stopped in Ai, then they went to Egypt, and they spent some time there, and so forth. And God has still made the promise and maintained the promise. It says, Abram and Sarai, you guys are going to have offspring, plural. Right? You're going to have children, your ancestors, and your descendants, rather. And they're old now, they have no kids. So you understand this promise is unusual. They're not in their early 20s, like some couples get married today. I do a lot of marriages as a pastor, and a lot of times people get married in their 20s. And in their 20s, you're like, they have kids. You guys are the results of marriages and things, of parents and so forth. So that's normal. But they're not 75, 80, 90 years old. Right? And so this promise that God has given, you can understand in Abram's mind and in Sarai's mind, they're probably kind of wondering, really, God? Right? We're going to have kids at our age? I mean, this is way beyond what is normal. Okay? So, Genesis 15, 1 through 6. Ada, would you read that for me, please, those 6 verses?
Me?
Chapter 15, please.
After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir, your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be.
Keep going, one more.
And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness.
All right, so you caught that name in there, a funny name, Eliezer of Damascus. What that is that was a servant of Abram's. He worked for him. Now, in the law, in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew law, if you don't have any heirs, any sons, when you die, all your belongings go to your heir. If you don't have sons, then it goes to the oldest servant. Right? So he thinks that his heir is a servant, this guy who's not his own flesh and blood. So he's like, Lord, you said that I was going to be the father of a great nation. It can't be through my servant. He's not related to me. He works for me. Right? And God says here in the promise, he says, no, your ancestors, your descendants, they're going to be from your bloodline. It's going to be your son. And you can imagine he's kind of going, I'm scratching my head here. And so God goes, step outside. Look up in the sky. See all those stars? That's how numerous your descendants are going to be. That's pretty amazing. Right? And it says that he believed God. Okay? So what was Abram's response to God?
He believed.
He believed him. In fact, if you want to put this word down, faith. Right? He demonstrated faith. He believed God. Okay? So this is a good thing. It's a good thing for Abram, right? He's on his way. He's believing God. It's a good thing. All right. Sarai and Hagar. Hagar. That's a really nice name, right? Hagar. Let's see. Who hasn't read yet? Ava, would you please? That paragraph under Sarai and Hagar.
10 years after God called Abram to be his home and gave him the promise that he would be the father of many nations. Abram and Sarah were still childless. Sarah decided to take things into her own hands and give her Egyptian servant Hagar and Abram as a second wife.
Okay, so we're going to see what happens here. Now again, remember what faith is. Faith is trusting God, God's plan. Abram, Sarai, you're going to be the parents of a great nation. They're getting old. They're checking the calendar. They're kind of like going, hey, I don't know how we're going to have any kids. We don't have any kids now. God made this promise. We've been walking. We're living in Egypt. We're back in this area and so on. We still have no children. So Sarai, a little impatient and lacking in faith, says, here's what we're going to do. Now, I know this is weird because we don't live this way, but in biblical times, she says, listen, I want to have a descendant. So she had certain servants that she was like in charge of. They worked for her. She probably kind of owned them, sort of. Okay? And so she says to my husband Abram, I'm going to give you Hagar. You have a child with her. I know that sounds weird. Okay? And then she'll be, right? She'll actually be kind of what we call a surrogate. She's standing in for me. So her child is like my child. And then he'll be the heir. Okay? That's the plan. Okay? And so she actually, let's read it here. Jace, would you read those 6 verses, 1 through 6 of chapter 16 of Genesis? Genesis 16. Sarai and Hagar.
Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant, his name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant, it may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarah. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. When she saw that she had been conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her.
Okay, so simple story. This starts to be a soap opera, a drama, right? And what's happening here is Sarai gives to her husband Abram her servant girl Hagar so that she can have an heir. Hagar gets pregnant, right? And once she realizes she's pregnant, she evidently kind of starts looking down her nose at Sarai. You're old. You weren't able to have a child. I am. I'm great. Right? I'm reading a little bit into this, but she looked at her with contempt. Now, Sarai didn't care much for that. Right? She goes, wait a minute, I'm kind of your master. You work for me, and now you're kind of acting all greater than me, and so forth. So she goes and complains to her husband. Her husband, this is not a good time for Abram, because he's like, hey, listen, it's your servant girl. You do whatever you want. And it says that Sarai treats her harshly. I don't know if she hits her, I don't know if she yells at her, but she runs her off. Right? And later on, she actually gives birth to a young boy named Ishmael. And you might know that story in some of the Sunday school stories. But anyhow, so that's where it comes from. So, keeps going here. The covenant of circumcision. I'll read the top one here. Ishmael, that's the son that Hagar gave birth to, was 13 years old, and Abram was 99. Right? When God appeared to Abram again. So remember, he appeared to him, go to a land I'm going to show you. Okay? And then here he comes again and says, I'm going to revisit this covenant that I gave you. Right? God renewed his covenant, just repeated it with him and gave him a new name, Abraham. So he went from Abram to Abraham, the father of nations, that's what it means. And God told Abraham that all his offspring from that time forth were to be circumcised. That's a physical mark on their body. And God gave Sarai a new name called Sarah. So they're no longer Sarai and Abram, they're Sarah and Abraham. What other news did God have for Abraham? Genesis 17, 15 through 21. Anna Joe, would you read that, please? 17, 15 through 21.
And God said to Abraham, as for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 99 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. God said, No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. When he had finished talking with him...
Oh, stop there, just 21. So we've got this great story. So the news is, what other news did God give to Abraham? What was the great news?
He's going to have a child.
Going to have a child. In fact, more specifically, a son. See, a son is an heir. Son carries on the name. Just kind of like in our culture today, ladies, if you get married, unless it's different, you change it in that way, most of the time you take the last name of the man, right? And so that way the name of his family continues. So he becomes an heir, okay? And so that's what he wants. He wants a son so that his family will continue. So all of his stuff, right, ultimately will go to, right, his son Isaac, right? So, the birth of Isaac, right? The birth of Isaac. 25 years after God promised Abraham a son, Isaac was born. So God says, pack up your stuff, go to a land I'm going to show you, right? He's 75 years old, packs up his stuff, and 25 years later, the promise comes true, right? Now, you and I are not that patient, right? If somebody were to tell you, I mean, if you're like, hey, you ever done that when you're on a trip and mom and dad are driving or something like that, and you're like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Right? And they say almost, right? We're not very patient. Abraham and Sarah had to wait 25 years, and in that 25 years, they doubted God quite a bit. Go into Egypt, tell everybody you're my sister, right? I don't believe God's actually going to protect us and make us into a great nation, okay? That's doubt, right? And then Sarah, right, saying, you know, Abraham, we're not having any kids, so here, take my servant girl Hagar, have a kid with her, and then that way you'll have an heir. Again, not trusting God. And then 25 years total, finally God comes to Abraham and says, guess what? You're going to have a child. And they're like, come on, right? No way. It's almost unheard of. I'm 99 years old and not going to have a kid. So look back at 17, Genesis 17. Verses 15 and 17, we already read this. He says, the kings will come from her, and then Abraham fell on his face, laughed, and said to himself, shall a child be born to my wife who is this old? Now, jump to chapter 21, Genesis 21. All right? 21, 1 through 7. 1 through 7. Let's see. Somebody have it, Chloe?
The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time to which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son, and he was born to him. And Sarah bore him Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham and that Sarah would nurse children, that I have borne him a son in his old age?
Okay, so Isaac means laughter. By the way, when he says that Sarah says, who would have said that Abraham and Sarah would nurse a child? God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. It means happily. They're joyful for her. At 99, you finally have a son. Kind of puts an interesting twist on take your dad to school day. Right? Everybody else is kind of hanging out with dad and so forth. And here comes Isaac's dad in a walker. Right? Because he's 100 years old. Totally different than everybody else's dad. Right? Because he's so much older than what is normal. So when you think about this, joy comes from God's promises. So let's take that another step further. Abraham and Isaac. This is a well-known story. Chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. I'm going to read this real quick. All right, so everybody take a look at chapter 22. All right, everybody looking in there? Chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. After these things, God tested Abraham. So right away we know in the story, this is a test. And he said to Abraham, he said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, that you have waited for your whole life, right? Whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I tell you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to the young man, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship, and come back again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. He took in his hand the fire, that's a little ember, and the knife, so that they went together, both of them together. And Isaac said to the father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, I imagine he was choking back tears, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." And so they went, both of them together. And when they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Tied him up, laid him on top of the altar, right, and getting ready to light it on fire. So I want you to just imagine for a second what this is like for Isaac, right? I mean, he's a young boy, he's there with Dad, and Dad's like, "We're doing this because God said so." Right? This son that I have waited 100 years for, who's my only heir, my only offspring, he is my only son, and God says, "Go take him up on this mountain and take his life and burn him as an offering to me." That's basically what he said. Right? So just, I know we read these stories and go, "Oh, this is what happens." Put yourself in those people's shoes, so to speak, or sandals as it happens to be. Right? And it says that Abraham, verse 10, reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, right, a male goat, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went, took the ram, offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of the place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "On the mount the Lord will provide." All right, so one of the things we say, does this account remind you of another father and son? Does this account remind you of another father and son? And there's a reason that those words are capitalized. Who does it remind us of? What story is that like? Abraham taking Isaac up onto a hill to sacrifice him. Shella?
Jesus on the cross.
Yeah, Jesus on the cross. Right? I want you to think about it. What did Isaac have to carry up the mountain? Wood. What did Jesus carry up Golgotha? Wood, the cross. Right? And was Jesus the only son? Was he precious to the Father? Yeah. And so here's Isaac carrying up the wood up the hill, and he's going to be sacrificed. Now the difference is Isaac wasn't sacrificed, he was spared. The difference between Jesus, he wasn't spared, he was sacrificed. In fact, it's interesting that what animal was caught in the thicket to die instead of Isaac? A ram, a lamb, a goat, right? Along those lines. What was Jesus often called? The Lamb of God. The Lamb of God, right? So there's lots of parallels. You and I get to see that because we live on this side of the resurrection. Abraham had no idea what Jesus was going to be like or what was going to take place in the future, but then they would see that. All right, it goes on here. Jacob and Esau, we don't have to look this up, but just to kind of finish this out. Abraham had his servant find a wife for Isaac from his family in Haran. So go all the way back to Haran, the top of the map. Right? Isaac married Rebekah, and they had 2 boys, Jacob and Esau. Esau was the firstborn, but God told Rebekah that Esau would serve the younger twin. Remember, in twins, whoever comes out first is the oldest, even if you're only a couple minutes apart. Okay? And when it comes to heirs, right, who's the one that gets dad's stuff or the family carries on? It's the eldest, right? So Esau, even though he is the eldest, God tells Rebekah, the mom, says, actually Esau is not going to be the heir. It's going to be Jacob, right? And there's going to be something that's going to happen in there. Esau despised his birthright, which means he despised that he was the eldest, and he gave it up to Jacob for a bowl of stew. One time when he says, I'm so hungry, I'm starving. He wasn't really, he was just hungry. And Jacob said, I'll trade you my food for your birthright. And Esau's like, I don't care, I just want something to eat. And he swaps that. Kind of says, you are now considered the eldest. And it says, later Rebekah and Jacob tricked Isaac into giving Jacob the blessing for the firstborn. So dad kind of has this ceremony where he kind of goes, you are now the heir. But Jacob was almost blind. And he couldn't tell the difference really between Esau and Jacob. And so Rebekah kind of tricked him a little bit and said, no, this is Esau, your blessing. Okay, so here's the blessing. And Jacob kind of goes, there, I'm the oldest, I'm the heir. All right, and gets that. So not really good. Okay, turn over to page 32. Page 32. In that great big blank box, I want you to write something that is not what it's asking for. I want you to do a little assignment for me, for me this week. And so here's what I want you to do. I want you to write this down. Choose a patriarch. Choose a patriarch. I'll spell patriarch for you. Patriarch. Patriarch. But it's pronounced arch. Patriarch. Choose a patriarch. There's three of them. Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. Choose one. Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. And I want you to tell me two things about it, based on what we've talked about tonight. That goes for those of you who are watching from home as well. Right? I want you to tell me two things about them. Or two things about them. Might be a list of things. The first is, how did he, whoever you pick, how did he show he was a sinner? How did he show he was a sinner? If you pick Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, how did he show he was a sinner? And the second one is the opposite. How did he show faith in God? Okay? So I want you to pick Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, and I want you to list two things. List to me how he demonstrated that he was a sinner, and then I want you to list off some ways that he demonstrated that he had faith in God. So not much. Most of the things we talked about tonight, but you might review some of the Bible passages. Just list off in that box, right? I'm going to pick Jacob. Here's where he showed how he was a sinner. This shows how he had faith in God. And then just snap a picture of it, text it to me, send it to me. All that information in those emails that you guys have gotten in the past. Questions on that? You guys understand what I'm asking for? Pick a patriarch, Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. Tell me how they were sinners. Tell me how they demonstrated faith. Just pick one. Don't do all three. Right? And just pick one or the other. Okay? If there aren't any questions for that, guys, God bless you. Thanks for being here tonight. Do this homework. Send it to me by Wednesday of this week. Wednesday. God bless you guys.